Well, 9 years ago, I asked the question on Twitter, if Trump gets dementia, how will we know? Donald Trump makes a public dementia diagnosis difficult because he is a pathological liar, having been caught telling over 30,000 lies in his first 4 years of the presidency. He's also the most ignorant person in the history of the American presidency and usually operates at a level of public stupidity never seen in American political history. And so if you mix or together pathological lying with ignorance and relentless stupidity, you will sound like you are in neurological decline all the time, even if you're not. When you throw in a 79-year-old brain, then dementia is one of the very first things you think of when you see Donald Trump on Friday get up from his chair in the middle of a White House meeting with oil executives to turn away from everyone in the room and gaze out a window which he imagined to be the entrance to a building that does not exist, and then stand in that window talking to himself about what isn't outside that window.
I got to look at this myself. Wow. What a view. This is the door to the ballroom. What a unusual time to look.
No, it's not the door to the ballroom. But he is right that it is an unusual time to look at his imaginary ballroom. And so everyone who has seen that, including the oil executives who were in that room, are left to wonder, is that dementia or is that just Trump? That's the person who was trying to convince the oil industry executives to rush down to Venezuela and start taking Venezuelan oil, and he convinced none of them to do that. And the evidence of Trump dementia during the meeting probably convinced most or all of them that Donald Trump can't be believed about anything.
You'll make it back one way or the other. You're all going to do very well. I think really very well. Marco just gave me a note. Go back to Chevron. They want to discuss something. Go ahead. I'm going back to Chevron, Marco. Thank you, Marco.
Was there a question, Mr. President?
Yes, go ahead, Marco. What are you saying here?
Is that dementia or is that just Trump? Imagine what the White House press corps would have done with that if Joe Biden had done either one of those things that you just saw Donald Trump do. Donald Trump went to Detroit today to lie to the audience of rich people at the Detroit Economic Club, telling them that prices are down after a year of inflation holding steady thanks to Donald Trump's tariffs and Donald Trump's other economic mismanagement. And so I think we can assume his lie about inflation to an audience that knows better today was just Donald Trump's typical pathological lying. He would have told that lie at his sharpest. That particular lie is not evidence of neurological decline in Donald Trump, but it is further proof that you cannot believe anything Donald Trump says about anything. Donald Trump droned through a lifeless teleprompter reading of a speech that appeared to be his first reading of the words that he was speaking to that audience. And at the end, Donald Trump decided, in what could well be evidence of dementia, that the Detroit Economic Club really wanted to see him dance in his 79-year-old way to America's gay national anthem, YMCA, by the Village People, which was blaring away in the nightclubs that Donald Trump frequented when that song came out in 1978, when he was 32 years old.
The United States is winning again, and we're rapidly making America and the great state of Michigan greater and more prosperous than ever before. I want to again thank the Detroit Economic Club. You do a fantastic job, so respected. God bless you, and God bless America. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
you feel down? I said, young man, pick yourself off the ground. I said, young man, 'cause you're in a new town. There's no need to be unhappy.
The man just walking off that stage and disappearing into those black curtains after trying and failing to dance thinks he is the acting president of Venezuela. He has publicly declared himself to be the acting president of Venezuela. And that is strong evidence of dementia. And it is a Trump pathological lie. And it is further proof that you cannot believe anything Donald Trump ever says about anything. And I mean anything. Donald Trump says she ran him over. The man who thinks he is the acting president of Venezuela said, quote, she ran him over. She didn't try to run him over. She ran him over. Those were Donald Trump's exact words when lying about Renee Good. Every video from every angle of the killing of Renee Good by one of Donald Trump's ICE agents shows that she did not run him over. And this angle proves that the ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, fired his last two shots at her when she posed no threat to him at all. He is clearly standing beside a car that is moving away from him. It is impossible for that car to hit that man now in that spot when he is firing that gun. That car cannot suddenly go sideways. The decision to fire those shots would have been made only if Jonathan Ross was convinced that the first shot he fired did not stop her. The fact is that most bullets fired by law enforcement officers in the line of duty miss their targets most of the time. But if Jonathan Ross's first shot hit Renee Good, then there was no reason to fire a second shot. And if the second shot hit Renee Good, then there was no reason to fire a third shot. And law enforcement officers are required to assess the situation after each shot that they fire to decide whether to fire another shot. It is not legal for them to just keep firing bullets as long as they have bullets. If the third shot hit Renee Good and killed her, that shot was fired when she posed no threat to Jonathan Ross or anyone else on that scene, as this disturbing video proves.
No! No! Oh my God! What the What the You just what the did you do? What did you do? You! Shame! 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 Shame!
There was no apparent injury to Jonathan Ross on that video. You see him walking all the way down to the car after he has fired the deadly shots. Then you see him walking all the way back. No limping, nothing, no hint in any of his movement after the fact that he was injured in any way, not injured in the slightest, no hint of that in that video. It was mass resignation day in the Trump Justice Department today from Minnesota to Washington, D.C. In Washington, 6 members of the Civil Rights Division of the Trump Justice Department quit. MS Now's Carol Leonnig and Ken Delaney report, quote, top leaders of the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division have left their jobs to register their frustration with the department after the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dhillon, decided not to investigate the ICE officer's fatal shooting of Renee Good last week. The criminal section of the division would normally investigate any fatal shooting by a law enforcement officer and specializes in probing potential or alleged abuse of improper use of force by law enforcement. So the most experienced lawyers in dealing with incidents like this at the Trump Justice Department are not being allowed to participate in the investigation in any way. And in Minnesota today, another 6 attorneys have quit the Trump Justice Department in the U.S. Attorney's Office there. The Minnesota Star Tribune reports that, quote, a majority of the leadership team at the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office resigned on January 13 over the direction of the Justice Department under the Trump administration. Among those who resigned was Joe Thompson, the lead federal prosecutor and public voice on uncovering rampant fraud in Minnesota. Joe Thompson is a 12-year veteran of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota and has been leading the fraud investigation in Minnesota that Donald Trump claims is the reason he sent thousands of federal agents to Minnesota in what our first guest tonight calls an invasion. The Minnesota Star Tribune reports, quote, the departures of several prosecutors stemmed from directives from top federal officials to staff members after the killing of Renee Good by ICE agent Jonathan Ross, according to sources familiar with the decision. That included blocking the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension from the investigation into the shooting and a request from the Justice Department to investigate Good's widow for possible federal charges. Governor Tim Walz, whose state government has been the focus of Joe Thompson's fraud investigation, said, quote, Joe is a principled public servant who spent more than a decade achieving justice for Minnesotans. This is a huge loss for our state. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said, quote, when you lose the leader responsible for making the fraud cases, it tells you this isn't really about prosecuting fraud. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison has now turned Kristi Noem into a defendant in the case of Minnesota versus Noem. The Attorney General, along with the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, are suing the Department of Homeland Security to stop what Attorney General Ellison calls the Trump invasion of Minnesota.
The deployment of thousands of armed, mass DHS agents to Minnesota has done our state serious harm. This is, in essence, a federal invasion of the Twin Cities and Minnesota, and it must stop.